Hi readers, thank you for joining me today. And today's lesson is using words from the text to make a movie in my mind. And we're really going to focus on those sensory images to help us better understand what we are reading. Your learning target today is I will use the words, images, moods, sounds, in other words, the sensory images from the text to make a movie in my mind. You will need Post-it notes or notebook paper and a pencil for this activity. All right, so you're probably asking yourself, how do you create that award-winning movie in your mind as you are reading? And hopefully you will be able to sense the answer. What exactly does sensory images mean? Well, sensory images, also known as visualizing, is when you use your five senses, smell, taste, touch, hear, and sight, to create that movie in your head of what the text says. How do you improve your sensory image skills? Well, becoming a stronger movie producer in your mind. It takes a lot of practice. Some people believe that using sensory images is simply using one sense, sight. But no. When you use as many of your senses as possible to create an award-winning movie in your mind, reading becomes engaging and understanding. So let's practice. Take a look at this picture. Ask yourself, when I read or see a text, what is my mind seeing? What is my mind hearing? What is my mind smelling? And what is my mind touching? What is my mind tasting? What is my mind smelling? So the mist from the waterfall smells like rain. What is my mind touching? The hard plastic oar in my hands, my back violently hitting the back of the kayak, my life jacket leaving a rash on my neck from rubbing it against it, the water hitting my face and hands. What is my mind tasting? I can taste the combination of water and sweat in my mouth. By using all of your senses to create a sensory image of what you are reading, you are not just reading a story, but experiencing the story. Sometimes drawing out what you see in your mind helps with creating sensory images that will engage your reading. And I will show you what that looks like when I did this with Chapter 1 and Chapter 7, no judging my drawing. But sometimes the drawing will help you understand your reading. So why is using sensory images so important? Why is it so important? Well, readers use images to draw conclusions, to interpret text, and to recall important details. Using sensory images allows you to experience the reading. Sensory images allows learners to adjust their images as they continue to learn new information. And images from reading become a part of the reader's writing, drawing, and using sensory images allows you to connect with other readers about what is happening in the story. So these are all reasons to use sensory images. All right, so readers, today I want to show you my drawing and how I use sensory details. So class, today this is part of your homework, you're going to pay close attention to the sensory images to make a movie in your mind. You're going to write or draw what you are envisioning using as many senses as possible. And this is something that I sketched and using an example from Chapter 1. Rob discovers the tiger, and the fog was hugging the ground. To Rob, it seemed as if the tiger was some magic trick. So I could see in my mind the bright orange color of the tiger. If I had orange, I'd color it in, but I didn't at the time. But I could feel the moisture, I could smell the dampness in the air, and that's what I pictured or envisioned, and it was real clear to me at that time. And then I went to use an example from chapter 7, and this comes from this part in the book where it says, the other kids shouted and screamed and laughed and called to each other, but the two of them sat apart from it all, as if their seat was an island in the sea of sweat and exhaust. And here's an example of like the bus up in the corner, and then the exhaust coming out, and I could smell that exhaust, and I could hear the kids shouting and screaming at one another. And then I just envisioned Sistine and Rob sitting off by themselves, and not really, nobody else really paying attention to them or caring about what they're doing, and it made them almost on an island. So today, class, as you're reading, I want you to get a piece of paper and a pencil, and I want you to find that part in your book that stands out to you, where you can envision what is happening using as many senses as possible.
Class, I'm going to start reading from The Tiger Rising, chapters 9 and 10 today. If you would like to practice your envisioning skills and you want to sketch out a picture or write those words that help you make that strong movie in your mind, you certainly may do so. Chapter 9. His father woke him up at 5:30 the next morning. "Come on, son," he said, shaking Rob's shoulder. "Come on, you're a working man now. You got to get up." He took his hand away and stood over Rob for a minute more, and then he left. Rob heard the door to the motel room squeak open. He opened his eyes. The world was dark. The only light came from the falling Kentucky star. Rob turned over in bed and pulled back the curtain and looked out the window at the sign. It was like having his own personal shooting star, but he didn't ever make a wish on it. He was afraid that if he started wishing, he might not be able to stop. In his suitcase of non-thoughts, there were also not wishes. He kept the lid closed on them, too. Rob leaned on his elbow and stared at the star and listened to the rain gently drumming its fingers on the roof. There was a warm, glowing kind of feeling in his stomach, a feeling that he wasn't used to. It took him a minute to name it. The tiger. The tiger was out there. He got out of bed and put on shorts and a t-shirt. "Still hot," his father said when Rob stepped out the door. "And it's still raining." "Uh-huh," said Rob, rubbing his eyes. "Yes, sir. If it don't stop soon, the whole state ain't going to be nothing but one big swamp." "The rain don't bother me," Rob muttered. On the day of his mother's funeral, it had been so sunshiny that it hurt his eyes. And after the funeral, he and his father had to stand outside in the hot, bright light and shake everybody's hand. Some of the ladies hugged Rob, pulling him to them in jerky, desperate movements, smashing his head into their pillowy chests. "Oh, if you don't look just like her," they told him, rocking him back and forth and holding on to him tight. Or they said, "You got your mama's hair, that cobwebby blonde," and they ran their fingers through his hair and patted his head like he was a dog. And every time Rob's father extended his hand to somebody else, Rob saw the ripped place in his suit where it had split open when he slapped Rob to make him stop crying, and it reminded Rob again, "Do not cry. Do not cry." That was what the sun made him think of, the funeral, and so he didn't care if he ever saw the sun again. He didn't care if the whole state did turn into a swamp. His father stood up and went back into the motel room and got himself a cup of coffee and brought it back outside. The steam rose off of it and curled into the air. "Now that I am a working man," Rob said shyly, "could I drink some coffee?" His father smiled at him. "Well," he said, "I guess that'd be all right." Rob went inside and poured himself a mug of coffee and brought it back outside and sat next to his father and sipped it slowly. It tasted hot and dark and bitter. He liked it. "All right," his father said after about 10 minutes. "It's time to get to work." He stood up, It wasn't even 6 o'clock. As they walked together alongside the back of the motel to the maintenance shed, his father started to whistle Mining for Gold. It was a sad song he used to sing with Rob's mother. Her high, sweet voice had gone swooping over his father's deep one like a small bird flying over the solid world. His father must have remembered, too, because he stopped halfway through the song and shook his head and cursed softly under his breath. Rob let his father walk ahead of him. He slowed down and stared into the woods, wanting to see some small part of the tiger, a flick of his tail or the glow from his eyes, but there was nothing to see except for rain and darkness. "Come on, son," his father said, his voice hard, and Rob hurried to catch up. Chapter 10. Rob was sweeping the laundry room when Willie Mae, the Kentucky Star's housekeeper, came in and threw herself down in one of the metal chairs that were lined up against the cement block wall. "You know what?" she said to Rob. "No, ma'am," said Rob. "I'll tell you what," said Willie Mae. She reached up and adjusted the butterfly clip in her thick black hair. "I'd rather be sweeping up after some pigs in a barn than cleaning up after the people in this place. Pigs at least give you some respect." Rob leaned on his broom and stared at Willie Mae. He liked looking at her. Her face was smooth and dark like a beautiful piece of wood, and Rob liked to think that if he had been the one who carved Willie Mae, he would have made her just the way she was, with her long nose and high cheekbones and slanted eyes. "What are you staring at?" Willie Mae asked. Her eyes narrowed. "What are you doing out of school?" Rob shrugged. "I don't know," he said. "What do you mean you don't know?" Rob shrugged again. "And don't be moving your shoulders up and down in front of me, acting like some skinny old bird trying to fly away. You want to end up cleaning motel rooms for a living?" Rob shook his head. "That's right. Ain't nobody wants this job. I'm the only fool Beauchamp can pay to do it. You got to stay in school, else you'll end up like me." She shook her head and reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out a single cigarette and 2 sticks of 8-ball licorice gum. She put one piece of gum in her mouth and handed the other one to Rob, lit her cigarette, leaned back in the chair, and closed her eyes. "Now," she said. The scent of smoke and licorice slowly filled the laundry room. "Go on and tell me why you ain't in school." "On account of my legs being all broke out," said Rob. Willie Mae opened her eyes and looked over the top of her glasses at Rob's legs. She said after a minute. "How long you had that?" "About 6 months," said Rob. "I can tell you how to cure that," said Willie Mae, pointing with her cigarette at his legs. "I can tell you right now. Don't need to go to no doctor." "Huh?" said Rob. He stopped chewing his gum and held his breath. What if Willie Mae healed him, and then he had to go back to school? "Sadness," said Willie Mae, closing her eyes and nodding her head. "You keep all that sadness down low in your legs? You not letting it get up to your heart where it belongs? You got to let that sadness rise on up." "Oh," said Rob. He let his breath out. He was relieved. Willie Mae was wrong. She couldn't cure him. "The principal thinks it's contagious," he said. "Man ain't got no sense," Willie Mae said. "He's got lots of certificates," Rob offered. "They're all framed and hung up on his wall." "I bet he ain't got no certificate for sense, though," said Willie Mae darkly. She rose up out of her chair and stretched. "Well, I gotta clean some rooms," she said. "You ain't going to forget what I told you about them legs, are you?" "No, ma'am," said Rob. "What'd I tell you, then?" she said, towering over him. Willie Mae was tall, the tallest person Rob had ever seen. "To let the sadness rise?" Rob said. He repeated the words as if they were part of a poem. He gave them a certain rhythm, the same way Willie Mae had when she said them. "That's right," said Willie Mae. "You got to let the sadness rise on up." She left the room in a swirl of licorice and smoke. After she was gone, Rob wished that he had told her about the tiger, he felt a sudden desperate need to tell somebody who wouldn't doubt him, somebody who was capable of believing in tigers. All right, boys and girls, thank you so much for listening to today's lesson. I just want to remind you that I want you to practice your envisioning skills, and I want you to pay close attention to the sensory images and the words in the story so that you can make that movie in your mind. You can write or draw what you're envisioning, and I want you to try to use as many senses as possible. All right, thank you so much. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.